Hello, welcome to Module 7. We are quickly getting to the last 2 weeks of the course. We have Module 7 this week and then Module 8 next week, and then the course will be finished. But we have a lot of work to do before then, so let's get started with Module 7. I want to take a look first at the module overview. Always read the objectives as well as the module overview. Specifically the tips for success. They'll be echoed in the announcement that we'll move on to next, but I just want to point out under the first one for tips for success, review any past assignments and implement feedback before submitting your project. That's what you'll be focusing on this week is project 7-1. Specifically, any feedback received on your first draft submitted in module 5 should be considered while working on part 1 of the project. For part 2 of your project, you will address and describe a new audience and writing situation, the secondary audience you selected in module 2. In your project, make sure you identify your new audience first before revisiting the first version of your paper and making changes to it to adapt your writing style and conventions in the second version. And then the third tip for success, when you are completing assignments, all sources should be cited using APA or MLA style. The module resources, as well as the project templates and exemplars, will help you choose your chosen style. For additional help with citations and writing support, consult the academic support module. So those are the three important areas that we're focusing on in Module 7. Completing 7-1, the project, parts 1 and 2, and then making sure that you have correct citations and format for those essays. And reminder that those, both APA and MLA, are covered on the resources page in the module. All right, so let's move to the announcement first. So beginning at the top, it notes that this is an important week in the course. And as it was just covered in the Module 1 information, the tips for success, we have part 1 and part 2 of 7-1. Specifically, again, you'll be making revisions to your draft, 5-1, which you submitted last week, and I have provided grading feedback and revision suggestions for. And then part 2 of 7-1, you'll be using that revised draft to write a second essay that speaks to a different audience, the audience you identified in 2-2 written response, audience understanding. And you may have to refresh your memory by actually going back to that assignment and checking to see what audience you listed. It is perfectly fine to change the second audience from that assignment if you have come to better understanding of things like it helps to have a completely different audience, not audiences that are very similar, in order to demonstrate that you understand that when you change audiences, that changes the writing situation and requires you, the writer, to make significant changes in your effort to communicate to that second audience. So keep that in mind. The most obvious one, of course, is that there's a difference between speaking to children and speaking to adults. So we would see that in the tone, the word choice, the sentence structure, things like that. So keep that in mind. Consider, could I choose a second audience that'll make it easier for me to show that I understand the differences that need to be done in speaking to that different audience. Also, it's important to recognize that 7-1 project, parts 1 and 2, is eligible for 250 points, which is the largest number of points for an assignment in the course. So we've been building towards this assignment for the entire course, and this is considered a culminating project that demonstrates your understanding and abilities through this last 6 weeks of reading, doing assignments, and now you're demonstrating your ability to incorporate that information into your actual writing. That's why it's worth so many points. And it can significantly affect your grade, both by increasing it or on the other side, decreasing it. So it's very important that you put full effort into this assignment, that you turn it in on time so that you don't lose any points for the late deduction. Okay, so last week you had one discussion, that was the only assignment, and it was a discussion that was focused on audience awareness. So you shared your the part of your introduction that draws the reader in order to see some feedback from your classmates about both the effectiveness of audience awareness in that one, as well as you also shared some information about your plan in order to write the second essay for 7-1, where you change audiences. And then your classmates also gave you some feedback about that. So it's important that you review that feedback first before you go on to Module 7, so that you remind yourself of the importance of audience awareness, and then also see what the comments were from your classmates about how effectively you're doing that. Again, there's only one assignment due this week, but it's a large assignment. It includes 2 parts. This is an important thing for you to be aware of. You will be submitting the revised draft and the essay for a second audience as a single Word document, one document. So be sure that you do it. It tells you specifically to do that in the what to submit information. It's reminded here in the announcement. So be sure that you do that. Note also that the audience for the second essay must be named before the beginning of the second essay. So in a second, we'll take a look at the exemplar, but it shows you there how you need to do that. All right, so before beginning any of Module 7, I would like for you to do 3 things. And this will get you ready for the work that you need to do in Module 7, as well as get you ready to successfully complete 7-1 project. First, carefully read all grading feedback on 5-1, the draft. There is feedback in the grading rubric, in the summative comment below the grading rubric, and on the turned-in version of the draft. There are comments on the turned-in version of the draft. There are specific suggestions included for revision in that feedback. You'll want to address all of those issues before beginning work on any editing or proofreading. Things like fixing grammar or punctuation, those should be left very last. Address the issues that I've noted in your draft before you ever get down to looking at things like commas or subject-verb agreement. If you do not know how to access grading feedback, click on Help at the top of the course webpage, then click on Student Tutorial Videos, then SNHU Learning Environment, Feedback and Grades, and that video will show you how to access the feedback. Hopefully you've been doing that all along, but if you haven't, it's really vital that you do it for 5-1, because part of the grading requirement for 7-1 is that you demonstrate having done that you have in fact read and applied the revision suggestions that the instructor has made. So if you haven't read those, you can do that. Number 2, review the following so you will know exactly what it is you need to complete by next Sunday. First of all, 7-1 project guidelines and rubric. There are specific directions there that you need to review, read carefully. Also, the project exemplar essays. There's both one for MLA and APA. They're found just above the grading rubric, and then they'll also be attached below here in an easier to read version where the brackets and bolded information has been taken out. And then third, many students seem to be confused about the difference between summary and analysis in the drafts last week. Analysis is another word for evaluation. Here is a document that explains the difference and presents samples of each. And I'm not going to take the time to read through this at this point, but it's really important that you do, because the majority of students in the draft were not able to demonstrate that they understood the difference and could actually demonstrate their understanding in what they were writing. A summary is an overview of a text's main ideas. And the only place that you should be directly summarizing is in the introduction paragraph. When you do the overview of the article that you chose that's being focused on in your essay, that's where you summarize the core idea and the major point that that article is making. When you get to the body paragraphs, then you're moving into analysis or evaluation. So there is a brief summary example given here for the article, Why I Stopped Being a Vegetarian. So do read that, because that will show you the language, the focus that summary should have. It focuses just on what is actually on the page in the article. Doesn't bring in anything from you. It's just a summary of the author's main points and supporting points. Notice that the summary explains the main points of the article and a few of her main pieces of evidence for her argument, but the summary does not include any judgment or response. That is when you move into analysis. While summary describes what a text says, analysis or evaluation focuses on how the text says it and why it is significant. And in the outline that we used for 5-1, which I hope you looked at prior to writing your draft, and which I attached along with an exemplar to the grading feedback that I presented last week, you'll notice that there were a list of bullet points what needed to be in each body paragraph. First, you need to restate the key point in a topic sentence. Then you need to provide follow-up analysis of that topic sentence, the key point that it introduced, and that would have been the reason from your thesis. When it says follow-up analysis, simply what you're doing is adding another sentence that further explains how and why the text that you're focusing, or the reason you're focusing on, is significant. That should have been followed then by evidence in the form of a quote or paraphrase from the chosen article, along with citation. And then finally, the paragraph should have ended with a tie-back sentence to connect with the topic sentence. And that is where, after the quote, you're explaining your understanding, your analysis, your evaluation of how the text says what it says and why that is significant to your evaluation. And again, we have a sample that follows of the article, Why I Stopped Being a Vegetarian, that demonstrates how that is done. The writer has broken down this article, paying attention to tone. The article is funny, relatable, and engaging. Then the writer reconsiders the whole of Fraser's piece by examining the effect of that tone. Despite being engaging, the article isn't likely to be convincing to vegetarians because that same humor might alienate her audience. The analysis is about how the text was put together, how it will impact the readers of the article, and why that impact is important. That's what you're focusing on in this essay. Not summary. Only summary that should take place is in the introduction paragraph. The body paragraph should focus on analysis and evaluation. And it's done by following the outline and including all of the parts that are listed in the outline. It's also important to note that submitting an unrevised draft for the 7-1 project is not guaranteed to earn points in the same grade range as the draft submission 5-1 earned. You'll notice when you look at the guidelines and rubric that in the grading rubric there is an exemplary column that has been added. Remember that there's so many more points for this assignment, 250. So the expectation is that for both the revised draft and the essay written for a second audience, you will have made changes using feedback from your instructor. Revision is part of the writing process being assessed in 7-1. Revision is part of the overall writing process that you've been learning and practicing in the 6 modules up to this point. So it's important that you don't think, oh, I've already done this. I got a B. I'm pretty happy with that B, so I'm just going to turn the same thing in again. Well, unfortunately, that B will only earn you a C or less if you do that, because the points are different The expectations are different in a grading rubric that includes exemplary. So keep that in mind. Don't think that, oh, I got a B before, I'll guaranteed to get a B again. No, that's not the case. An important resource to consider this week is academic support. Let's see. I've gone back to the course webpage, and here up at the top is where you can click on academic support. And I've encouraged you to take a look at this earlier in the term, but I want to specifically have us look at what is available for you when you're getting to Module 7 and doing these final essays. Written feedback. You can upload and submit your drafts and assignments for written feedback. You can select the most important area for your tutor to focus on, and you'll receive targeted feedback that's returned to you within 12 hours. And all you have to do is click on this button, submit a draft, and it will give you what you need to fill in the text boxes with the information that they asked for, and then you upload your document, and then 12 hours later you get it back, and then you use that to make revisions on your essay. What it will not do is rewrite your essay for you. It won't make it more effective by itself. That's not their job. Their job is to help you take a second look at your essay, whatever written work you submit to them, and give you revision suggestions in the areas that you have asked them to do that. Keep in mind that this is a very busy week for them. A lot of classes have their major assignment due in Module 7, so there will be lots of other people who will also be using academic supports, writing feedback. You want to get yours in as early in the week as you can in order to have time to get it back, and then to do any revisions that are needed, and then still meet the midnight Sunday due date. All right, so now let's go back to the course webpage and the Module 7 guide. And this focuses on revising your writing. And the first thing that I need to again say is that it's important that you understand the difference between revision and editing or proofreading. Unfortunately, students often think that revision just means fixing commas, rearranging sentences, making sure your citations are correct, things like that. But revision is the more important. When you do things like fixing commas, that's considered editing or proofreading. Revision comes first, and it looks at large-scale problems in the writing that you're doing. During this week, you have a chance to kind of step back from your writing, review the suggestions that I've made on your draft, consider whether or not you want to use the academic support writing feedback system. But you need to first get in your mind how you're going to manage your time. But you need to have time set aside to first review, figure out what needs to be done as far as revisions, have a plan for revision, and then to actually implement the revisions, looking at large-scale problems first, and then finally, when you're done with all the large-scale issues, doing editing, fixing commas, etc. Revision is just what it says, re-seeing your writing, looking back at the original assignment, making sure that you're meeting what the assignment asks you to do, making sure that you have provided the information that was requested in the assignment in the format that was requested, so that you're reviewing the assignment directions as well as what to submit, making sure that that you understand the assignment. And if you don't understand anything about it, then that's the time to either ask a question in a general questions discussion or email me directly. And it's important that you think of it in those kinds of steps, that first you need to review your feedback, make a plan for revising, focus on large-scale issues in the revision, and then save time at the very end to do editing, things like fixing comments. The guide basically covers more deeply what I have just said. I like the questions here under key concepts. Good writing comes through revision, and the question, how can you use the feedback you have received throughout the course to improve your writing before you submit your project? As I said earlier, I'm hoping that you've been looking at the feedback all along, but it's vital that you look at the feedback on your draft, because that's what you're going to use to make the writing more effective for 7-1. Also think about where the resources are located for things like citations. The resources page, and we're going to look at that in just a second, is where you want to go. I think it's useful to have one place that you go rather than several places, because I think the more places you look at citation, the more confused you will become. Changing your audience will result in changes in the writing situation, which will in turn change tone, style, and word choice. However, changing your audience will not necessarily change the subject and purpose of your analysis. Remember that you're still using the same article. You're still trying to accomplish the same purpose by looking closely at the chosen article and making an evaluation. Is it effective? Is it ineffective? Why and how? That's not going to change between part 1 and part 2. The only thing that will change is the audience and possibly the writing situation. So it's really important that you think about what changes would you have to make to the first version of your paper to address the needs of your second audience and writing situation. So that's really important for you to consider as you move between parts 1 and parts 2. So let's move on to the resources page. And chapter 28 is a review of writing essays in general. It's a good one to skim. It doesn't focus specifically on the type of essay or assignment that you're doing, but it does give you good information about the revision process. So again, skimming would be adequate. Then the next two are resources for either APA or MLA. The majority of students seem to be using APA, so the important things to click on are APA in-text citation and APA reference entries, because those give you examples of what you need to use in your citation of quotes and paraphrases in your body paragraphs, and then what you need to list at the end of the essay on a separate page, information about the article that you chose. And then if you're using MLA, same things here, focus on in-text citation, and in this case, MLA's page is called the works-cited page. The additional support, the optional things, are all things that we've covered before. And as I said, I think it's a good idea to just use one source. So if you're using the e-textbook to help you with citation, just use that. They list the links to the library resources. I find those sources have so much more information that it does become a little bit overwhelming. So I encourage you to stick just with the e-textbook. Then we move to the actual assignment. And as always, we click on guidelines and rubric to get the real information. I'm not going to read the overview this time. I want to go down to the directions. I want to point out something that I don't know that students realized, because I saw this happening in the draft. When they give you this list, in previous assignments, the list and then that list having the highlighted words or the bolded words appearing on the grading rubric gave students the impression that this should be the body, or these should be the paragraphs that you actually have in your submission. And unfortunately, this is a little bit misleading, because you were given an outline in Module 5 to use and to follow in producing your draft. And that was actually the outline that you needed, not this information here. Oh, I get to use my drawing tool. This information is just that somewhere in the essay, you needed to include this information. And the majority of this information actually occurs in the introduction paragraph. That's where you identify the topic, you mention a genre, you describe the writer's purpose, you bring in historical or cultural context, you articulate the core idea, and summarize any details that are relevant. And you do that within the introduction paragraph. Remember, you're drawing the reader in first, and then you're giving a brief overview of the text in which you address 2 through 6. And then you end that introduction paragraph with your thesis statement. Yes, you do include at least one quote from the text, but you should actually be including evidence in each of the body paragraphs. So I want to bring up the outline here in just a moment to reiterate the structure that the essay needed to have, rather than thinking that we needed to follow this structure that's given in the instructions. Then we have information on part 2 that you're going to first identify the new audience. We'll look at in the exemplar how that's done. This audience obviously must be different from the one you addressed in the first version of your paper. I strongly suggest that it be a totally different audience, which will make your job easier in being able to demonstrate that you recognize that a different audience means different needs and word choice, tone, information, etc. And then specifically under what to submit, this is going to be a 3 to 5 page Microsoft Word document because it's going to be 2 essays. The draft was 1 to 2 pages, and when you expand to 2 different essays, then you're going to go to 3 to 5 pages. It should be double spaced, 12-point Times New Roman font with 1 inch margins. And this time, that is very important. I may have overlooked a different font in the previous submissions, but this time it's really important that you can demonstrate that you read the what to submit instructions and that you can meet those instructions. We do have a template for both APA and MLA, and basically, I'll just bring that one really quickly so you can see what's on there. They're same templates as the draft used. So for APA, it shows the correct format and information needed for the title page. For MLA, the template then shows the correct information needed for the heading. Notice that part 1 is just having you insert the text of your essay. Part 2 has you first identifying your new audience, inserting that text, followed by the actual essay. Then under supporting materials, we do have the exemplars, and I want to I'll go ahead and do the MLA one this time. I want to just bring it up and show you that just like in previous exemplars, it has information about the information, how it's functioning. And notice here that, remember just a moment ago, I talked about that list of 8 or 9 items under the directions, that it all should take place in the introduction paragraph. And here they are: the historical context, the topic, audience and purpose, cultural context. All those things appear in the introduction paragraph. They aren't body paragraphs where you address each of those separately in a separate paragraph. They all take place in the introduction paragraph as they prepare the audience for your thesis statement. Here's where we've got genre, etc. And then that paragraph ends with the thesis statement. So it's really important because I don't know what number of students misinterpreted that, but there were several. And so look at the exemplar, realize that the exemplar is including all of those things on that list here in the introduction paragraph. And to better help you understand the layout of the essays, I attached the outline and the exemplar for your particular MLA or APA in the grading feedback on the draft 5-1, 5.1. Let's take a quick look at it here. I will also include this in the announcement as an attachment, as well as the sample essays that I took the bracketed, bolded things out of to make them a little bit easier to read as far as reading for the flow. So those will be included in the announcement this week. But let's take a quick look at the outline, just as a reminder of how this essay should be structured. First of all, it's a 5-paragraph essay. There should be 1 introduction paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and 1 conclusion paragraph. If you misunderstood the directions, you ended up with 6 to 8 body paragraphs, and this is a 5-paragraph essay. Beginning with the introduction paragraph, it has 3 parts. You draw the reader in, 2 to 3 sentences where you pique their interest. Then you provide an overview of the topic, and that's where you do historical context, genre, any summary that you're going to do. And then you present the core idea of your paper, the thesis statement, which lists your 3 key points. There is a sample thesis in the exemplar essays that you can take a look at. Some people did use that to model their own thesis off of. Then you have the 3 body paragraphs, and the structure of the body paragraphs is repetitive. We have the same thing in all 3 body paragraphs, and that's fine. We're not trying to rewrite or reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to demonstrate that you understand what should be in an analysis or evaluation essay. So first, it should have a topic sentence. Every paragraph should begin with a topic sentence that's in your own words, entirely in your own words, that echoes the thesis statement. The function of the topic sentence is to tie the paragraph back to the point of your thesis statement. So you're going to echo the language of the thesis statement. And again, in the feedback, the grading feedback and revision suggestions that I did for your draft, I've given you some samples of both the thesis statement and topic sentences. Then after the topic sentence in each body paragraph, you're going to provide additional analysis of the key point, where you just discuss further what it is you're focusing on in your analysis in this particular body paragraph. That's followed by the quote or paraphrase from the chosen article. Choose those so that they support the point that you're trying to make. Don't just use random quotes, because I actually do read the paragraphs. And then you're going to finish with a tie-back sentence that reminds the reader of the importance of that quote or paraphrase in your analysis, in your evaluation. And often they echo the topic sentence. The secondary purpose of both the topic sentence and the tie-back sentence is that they help to organize the overall essay. Along with the thesis statement, they provide structure that the reader can, or the audience can easily follow as they move through the body paragraphs. And finally, you have the 5th paragraph, which is the concluding paragraph. It should be brief and concise. These are relatively short essays. So first you want to restate your thesis statement. And again, we're not reinventing the wheel, so it's perfectly fine to use the same wording in the restatement as you did in the introduction paragraph where you originally wrote the thesis statement. Then you emphasize the importance of the analysis to your audience, directly, specifically addressing that audience. Why is this important to them? How can they benefit by your analysis? And then finally, provide your reader with a final reflective thought. For instance, what did you learn from doing this close analysis of the chosen article? And then finally, you do want to look at the grading rubric. It will be somewhat familiar because it has the same criteria topics that the draft one did. And again, I can definitely understand how students were confused by what is included in the grading rubric and how it makes it look as though each one of these should be addressed in a body paragraph. But if you look at the exemplar and if you look at the outline, you will see that these things need to happen in the introduction paragraph. And then the evidence and details, etc., are happening in the body paragraphs. There are 2 parts this time, part 1 and then part 2, where you're demonstrating your understanding how a different audience requires different things of the writer. that you need to make sure that that audience's needs are being met. In this case, you want to read the meets expectations column. The exemplary column just notes that you've gone above and beyond what's described in the meets expectations. Again, also notice that to get an A, you have to exceed expectations in all categories. So if you're just meeting expectations, then you're going to fall into the B category at 85%. If you only partially meet them, then you fall lower into the C or D range. So shoot high, try to exceed expectations, but definitely make sure that you meet expectations. And finally, as in all modules, we look ahead to, in this case, the final module of the course. There will be a discussion next week, which will be the only assignment. And it has you reflecting back over the entire course. So as you move into Module 8, you'll want to start thinking about, well, what have I actually learned and practiced in this course? And how am I going to apply that in future courses and possibly in my career? Again, if you have questions, it's important that you look at this Module 7 early in the week so that you're clear on what's being expected of you, what you need to turn in, and if you have any questions or need any clarifications, that you get those to me as early as you can in the week so that we have an opportunity to get those into your revision process and submitted on time.